Hey, it's Tom Michael, General Manager here at Boise State Public Radio. Right now, public media is under threat. The White House has asked Congress to take back funding already approved for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, funding that sustains Boise State Public Radio and NPR stations like ours across the country. We stand to lose over $500,000 annually, jeopardizing our newsroom, programming, and mission. You can help. Learn how to take action at boisestatepublicradio.org/funding.
From the studios of Boise State Public Radio, this is Idaho Matters. I'm Troy Oppie, filling in for Gemma Gaudette. Happy Friday. It is time for our Reporter Roundtable. That's when we get you up to date on all the news that made headlines this past week. Our panel today is going to include Clark Corbin with the Idaho Capital's Sun, Sarah Cutler with the Idaho Statesman, Max Silverson, editor of the McCall Star News. But we start with Kevin Richards, senior reporter and blogger with Idaho Education News, and our own James Dawson from Boise State Public Radio. Gentlemen, welcome. The story of the week, I think, is the formal end to the University of Idaho's $685 million deal to buy the for-profit University of Phoenix. Kevin, how did that door finally get closed this week?
Well, Troy, it was kind of abrupt, but I don't think it was very surprising. There had long been indications that the purchase was on shaky ground, going back to last year's legislative session when the legislature slammed the brakes on this deal. You know, we never really saw any kind of attempt by the University of Idaho or the University of Phoenix to go back to the legislature to say, okay, we've got a restructured deal. Here's how we want to go forward. Add to that the fact that there have been reports that the University of Phoenix is looking to go some other way, perhaps going public themselves by offering an IPO on the market. So there were plenty of indications that this was that this deal was on thin ice. Next Tuesday was going to be a deadline. That was the drop dead date from the State Board of Education for the University of Idaho and the University of Phoenix to come to a deal. So the news that broke this week, we could kind of see it coming, but it is an end to a very long and very contentious chapter for the University of Idaho.
Well, and expensive as well. There were millions of dollars spent by the University of Idaho on due diligence on preparations to get this deal across the finish line, but they're going to get that money back, right?
Right. Expensive, but perhaps expensive not for taxpayers. So, and this again goes back to the conversations, the negotiations with the state board last year. The University of Phoenix immediately paid the University of Idaho about $5 million last year, and that covered some of those due diligence costs. And we've reported about the due diligence costs going back now over a year. U of I has apparently spent about $17 million on consulting, on financing, looking at the financing options for a $685 million deal, kind of looking at how you would structure a partnership with the University of Phoenix. Very, very expensive process. A lot of that business, by the way, going to University of Idaho President C. Scott Green's former employer, the international law firm of Hogan Lovells. So we knew that there were we know now that $17.2 million has apparently been spent on that due diligence. And as part of the deal this week, Phoenix is going to pay the U of I $17.2 million. So U of I and taxpayers will be kept whole if that indeed bears out to be the case.
And Jimmy, I want your thoughts on this too, because this was an obvious effort, I think, by the University of Idaho to bolster its online learning programs. They really liked the infrastructure that was in place from University of Phoenix, some of the other issues with the for-profit structure notwithstanding. But Jimmy, what do they do now for online learning, if not just at the University of Idaho, at the 4 state universities?
Boy, I mean, that's the $1 million question, right? And it got brought up yesterday in the special State Board of Education meeting from, board president Kurt Liebeck, basically saying that those needs to both meet students and Idaho adults who want to get certifications or, any sort of degree, that are not time restricted. Like you don't have to show up to a class at a certain time, nor do you have to show up to a specific campus. Those needs are still great and unmet. And they are going to discuss that a little bit more with University of Idaho during the August board meeting of the State Board of Education. But I mean, this is the direction that education has been turning, even in the what I graduated in 2012. So in the 13 years since I graduated, online components were kind of in their infancy at University of Idaho, I would say, but were becoming more and more widespread and used. And at least from what I've seen, either guest speaking at classes or talking to former professors, things haven't really moved much in those years, at U of I. But they certainly have technologically. And so again, those needs are still there, and we're waiting to see what might be done.
You both spend time in the state house. Is there an appetite among lawmakers to either find funding or create funding to stand up an expansion of these programs at the state's universities?
I think that's a really interesting question, and I think it becomes more interesting now with the Phoenix partnership off the table. I think, and Jimmy talked about it before. Kurt Leibeck's comments at the board meeting were pretty interesting. It was a very short board meeting, so there wasn't a lot of meat to this meeting. But Leibeck pointed out that all universities are going to face this demographic cliff. There are just going to be fewer 18 to 22-year-olds in the next few years who are looking to go to any college. So the colleges and universities are going to be competing for this shrinking pool of students. So he pointed out that was one of the reasons that he kind of liked the idea of partnering with the University of Phoenix. It was a way to diversify and work with and serve adult students, non-traditional students, at a time when those traditional student numbers are going to decrease. Yeah, that's a big challenge that's going to face higher education, not just in Idaho, and a big challenge for the U of I, who has seen enrollment increases over the past few years. Can they continue that? Can they sustain that in a very competitive market? There are a lot of questions about the future of higher education that rise out of the debate that we've seen, the discussion we've had about partnering with Phoenix.
Last question on this particular topic. One of the ways that state officials came after the deal was to accuse the State Board of Education of open meetings law violation. That court case remains in progress, Kevin, does it not?
As far as I can tell, it is still a live case. There is scheduled to be a what they call a status conference. So it is in full-blown court hearing. That's supposed to happen later in the month. The case is still alive and well because it's not really a case about the merits of the Phoenix acquisition. There were certainly overtones of that in the court documents. But when you get right down to it, this is an open meetings law case where Attorney General Raul Labrador has argued for 2 years now that the State Board of Education broke the open meetings law by holding the series of closed-door executive sessions in the spring of 2023 to discuss a Phoenix acquisition before ultimately approving, giving that deal the green light in an open session. So that's an open meetings lawsuit that I don't think is necessarily closed because it's not necessarily tied to the Phoenix purchase per se.
All right, moving on to Boise State University searching for a new president. That search is really hitting high gear now. The application process is open. The search committee has received its feedback from the different stakeholder groups on campus. Kevin, what's the latest that you're hearing there?
Well, there are some things we know about this search, but there are a lot of things we're not going to know about this search. As I wrote about on Thursday, this is such a high-profile search. I mean, you're looking for the president to lead the largest four-year university in the state. I mean, this is about as high-profile a public hire as we're going to see in the state this year or in the near future. But a lot of the work is going on behind closed doors. We don't know how many people have applied for the job. We don't know names and won't know names until we get down to a field of finalists. And that field of finalists is going to be set by a search committee, 8-member search committee, that right now is operating under non-disclosure agreements. None of the search committee members can talk publicly about the process. The process right now is very insulated, partly to protect the privacy of folks applying for the job. So
Hmm.
we won't know probably for, I would imagine, several months who's applied for this job, if there are any internal candidates, any candidates from other universities or colleges around the state. We're just not going to know at this point. And we won't know either really how much this whole search is going to cost. There is a contract with a headhunting firm for a little bit over $150,000. Costs may increase, and costs would certainly increase if the search were to be delayed or prolonged. And we really don't have a timetable. Troy, it's not clear exactly when this position is going to be filled. It usually takes several months to find a university president. The only deadline that the state board is talking about is, I think it's July 19th, I want to say,
Yeah,
is
that's the end of the application period, right?
it's the end of, like, I think they call it the preferred period for applications. So I don't know if people can apply late. Uh, any listeners who are planning to apply for the university job should probably do that in the next month just to be on the safe side. Um,
Right.
we really don't know how long this is going to take.
Jimmy, let's start this segment with you. An Idaho businessman with, let's say, a dicey at best history with the U.S. Forest Service has been nominated to be in charge of the Forest Service. But Michael Boren seemed to have a pretty smooth Senate confirmation hearing this week.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, only five of the, I believe, 23 senators were actually there in person and asked questions during the
Hmm.
hearing, which, sometimes is kind of a sign that they view it as kind of like a slam dunk situation. Um, yeah, you mentioned his history with the Forest Service. So he owns a ranch within the protected Sawtooth National Recreation Area. So it is a private landholding within that protected area. He has sparred with the Forest Service. You've got this airstrip that he built on his ranch that neighbors said that he built before getting the required permits. The Forest Service accused a company formerly linked to him of building an unauthorized cabin on federal land. So a couple ongoing things, and the only senator to bring this up was ranking member Democrat Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota, and basically just said, "Hey, can you just tell me a little bit more about that?" Usually in these confirmation hearings, maybe more so for cabinet members, you have senators asking very pointed, often combative questions, and that was not the case here. So when he was asked about this, Boren basically said that, look, he didn't even want to call them disputes. He wanted to call them disagreements,
Hmm.
and that they eventually worked themselves out, and he was able to, get the required permits, at least for the airstrip. As far as I know, the cabin situation is an ongoing problem that he's having to face, which Klobuchar also asked him to commit to, following full ethics guidelines within the USDA, which is the agency that oversees the Forest Service. And he said, yes, I've already consulted with these attorneys within the department. I will disclose any sort of conflicts of interest, and I will follow their advice. Yeah, like you said, pretty smooth sailing. He still needs a full Senate vote to confirm him, which, who knows when they're going to put that on the schedule.
And I guess just because I didn't mention it when I asked the question, his official title that he was nominated for is Undersecretary for Natural Resources and Environment at the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Kevin, let's get back to you. You've reported on what are now 5 tort claims filed against the Boise School District, all related in some way to a now deceased elementary special education assistant and allegations of sexual abuse and negligence. We knew about 2 of these claims through your reporting from claims from parents last month, but now there are more. What's the latest here?
This is an ongoing and really unsettling story out of the Boise School District. As you mentioned, Gavin Snow had worked at 2 Boise schools as a special education assistant. He died by suicide in January as Boise police were attempting to arrest him on child sexual abuse charges. So we're now up to 5 tort claims against the Boise School District that all relate in some manner to Gavin Snow. And 4 of them are from parents who say that Snow either abused or might have abused their children in the schools. We're now at tort claims totaling at least $102 million in damages. These are not lawsuits. Tort claims are a precursor to filing a lawsuit. Now, the Boise District has, I think it's 90 days to respond to these tort claims. And if they don't, and if there is no resolution of the case, then it can go to a lawsuit. Reading the tort claims, there are definitely recurring themes where parents are saying that either their children were abused or could have been abused, and that the district and the school officials did not adequately monitor or track Snow's behavior. The district is not commenting directly on any of these claims, but Superintendent Lisa Roberts has publicly apologized to Valley View parents and staff for the situation there, and they did do an investigation. The district reporting the Boise police have suggested that there may have been multiple incidents at Valley View involving more than one child. So we'll continue to watch this as it works its way through the courts, but it's a really unsettling case that's developing out at the Boise district.
And the 5th tort claim that's related to this is from a district teacher who says she was invited to that public meeting held at Valley View, but then the district has forbid her from going on district property. And what is this about?
A former teacher, Laura Bolton, who has a stormy relationship with the Boise School District. I think it's fair to say there have been lawsuits and settlements between Bolton and the district. But yes, she says that she attended that parents' meeting at Valley View in January at the invitation of a parent. She was later served a notice of trespass by the Boise district, basically forbidding her from going to events or meetings or any activities in Boise schools. She's claiming that's a First Amendment violation. So it is that 5th tort claim. And yeah, it all kind of does tie back to this Gavin Snow story, this Gavin Snow situation.
Max, glad to have you joining us from McCall this afternoon. This winter, 2 four-wheel riders escaped injury. Their UTV broke through the ice and sank in Payette Lake. The riders were safe. They were able to climb off. But the owners are on the hook for getting that vehicle out of the lake. They had to wait until things thawed out, but it sounds like the UTV is still in there.
That's right. Yes, it is still somewhere at the bottom of the lake.
Somewhere.
As part of somewhere down there. As part of their deal with the Department of Environmental Quality, they were notified that it's your responsibility to take this thing out of the lake. So they've followed those instructions. They hired a professional diving team, Mountain West Commercial Diving out of Kuna, to find it and to get it out of there. So that team spent 3 days on Payette Lake last week searching the bottom, and they went down themselves in diving equipment. They use a scanning machine, I'm not quite sure exactly what, and a little underwater UTV to kind of search for this thing. And they found other things. They found several log piles, some submerged boats, unspecified items, which I don't know what that means, but it means they didn't find this little side-by-side down there. So it's kind of not sure. We're not sure what happens next. DEQ will kind of look over that report and tell us what they do. They'll either take it out eventually or go back and look for it, or it will stay there. We're not sure.
And well, in DEQ, from your previous reporting, DEQ was taking sort of a hands-off approach to managing this, because they said, look, the owners of this vehicle are cooperating. They're going to get it back. They know they're on the hook for it. They're doing it in the time that we approve. Could DEQ do anything to speed up this process if they feel like the owners maybe aren't doing enough? if not finding the vehicle continues to stretch out into the summer.
Yeah, I think they can make this happen. It's not legal to just leave a bunch of gas at the bottom of the lake and
Right.
hope it goes away. But it's not. I think I'm not quite sure what will happen, really. Yeah, it. I expect that they will just extend the timeline since that is the status quo, really. We're
But they do
past the
say,
deadline.
yeah, we're past the deadline. But they do say that they're not worried about any of the gas that's in that vehicle. They're not extremely worried about pollution right now. Is that accurate?
Yes, that's correct. There doesn't seem to have been a massive leak of gas or oil or any kind of substances from the tank of this thing. It has a 9.5 gallon tank, this specific model of UTV, that was about three-quarters full, so seven-ish, 7 or 8 gallons of gas. If it had spilled out earlier, there was no evidence of it. There was no evidence
Mm.
found during the wreck. So that's all good news. There's been no evidence found in the water supply of McCall, which is pulled from pretty close to where this UTV went in. It's between the Mile High Marina and Brown Park in McCall. It's a very popular beach. But so far, there's been no evidence of any spills, which is good to hear.
That's such an interesting story. I'm glad everybody was safe, but such a fascinating story from Payette Lake. We'll see if they can get that out of there. Clark, let's start with you this segment and talk about what Governor Brad Little announced yesterday. State police are signing on to a federal immigration and customs enforcement program that deputizes some immigration enforcement duties to local law enforcement. What does this mean here in Idaho?
Yeah, thanks, Troy. Thanks for having me on. I'm glad we get a chance to talk about this. This was kind of breaking news yesterday afternoon, but what it means is as soon as the funding is approved, which could happen as early as next week, the state of Idaho and Idaho State Police will be transporting inmates who have been convicted of a crime in Idaho and who do not have the legal authorization to be in the U.S. when they complete their incarceration sentence, rather than being released back to their communities. They're going to be transported directly to an ICE detention facility in Idaho, such as the Jefferson County Detention Center in Rigby in eastern Idaho, for processing and for deportation is kind of the long and the short of what the agreement means. But the state's going to be asking for $300,000 to conduct up to 100 transports, again, of inmates, of people convicted of a crime who are finishing their sentence to be transported to ICE facilities in Idaho for deportation there, Troy.
Do we know yet where in the budget that money is going to come from?
No, we don't know. It has to go through this group called the Board of Examiners, which is going to be a meeting as early as next week to consider the funding request. And so I'm not exactly sure specifically where the money is coming from, but they are asking for $300,000 in funding to pay for the transports. We don't have a list of any of the individuals or any of the people that will be transported to ICE detention facilities for deportation. We don't have that yet. The state did say they were going to be compiling that data and sharing it out. I'm not sure what form that will take or when that will be. We don't know exactly how many folks that we're talking about, but in the press release that Governor Little sent out yesterday, in an interview, state officials talked about potentially hundreds of people, and they talked about really emphasizing people who have been convicted of violent crimes and things of that nature. But the press release from the governor also talked about people who have been convicted of driving under the influence, and so it doesn't appear that it's just going to be strictly, for instance, felony convictions or violent crimes of aggression or things of that nature, at least according to the press release that we all got from the governor's office yesterday afternoon, Troy.
Yeah, and Sarah, talk a little bit more about that. You reported on this as well. That language in the press release kind of struck me too, categorizing folks as the most dangerous of the dangerous, and kind of this rhetoric around people who are here illegally but have committed other crimes.
Yes, thanks for that. That was definitely something that caught our attention as well. I think there was some confusion around this initially. My understanding is that this program under ICE that allows the sort of deputizing roles could technically be used even for people who have been arrested and charged crimes but have not been convicted. Now, in the release, the governor's office said that they were planning to focus on folks who have been convicted and have completed their sentencing. But something that we did find is that the ACLU in some other states that have, taken on similar arrangements found that even when that was the intent, many people, frankly, had committed only minor crimes, such as traffic violations, or driving without a license, for example. And the ACLU here, as well as advocacy groups, raised concerns that the involvement of local law enforcement in immigration enforcement could exacerbate mistrust in law enforcement in these communities, and presented a whole host of other problems.
And another interesting thing before we move on, I thought, was that the governor said the most dangerous individuals will not be necessarily sent to the ICE detention facility in Jefferson County. They'll be moved out of state. This program expected to carry out over the next 12 months. Let's move to the reality of the deep cuts made to the U.S. Forest Service and the Parks Department. The reality is really starting to take hold. I think this week the superintendent of Crater Lake National Park in Oregon resigned over staffing shortages there. That's likely to be an incredibly busy season for Crater Lake because that park will close to visitors for 3 years this fall, so crews can rebuild some of the park's infrastructure. The Sawtooth National Forest announced cuts to service hours and temporarily closed some ranger stations. Now the Payette Forest has done the same. Several ranger stations are closed until further notice. Clark, I want to get your perspective on this in a second, but Max, you're on the ground in McCall, so I want to start with you. What's the local reaction to this news from the Payette National Forest this week? Oh, I think we've got another mute button.
Do you want me to jump in, Troy?
Yeah, let's jump in with you first, Clark.
Yeah, for sure. And I haven't actually been out to McCall, but I had a chance to talk with some conservationists just as these cuts were announced. And it's noteworthy, Troy, the first cuts and the temporary closures in Ketchum and Stanley in the Sawtooth National Recreation Area were announced just hours before the busy Memorial Day weekend a couple of weeks ago, which is really the kickoff to the summer recreation season on public lands in Idaho. But when I talked to some conservationists, including John Robison here locally from the Idaho Conservation League, he expressed a lot of concern. He talked about every day, countless people visit these ranger stations, these district offices, these Forest Service offices, and he worries that the temporary closures, the reduced operating hours are going to make it much harder to get information to the public about fire safety concerns, about food storage in bear country, about trail closures, about any kind of information that people would want when they're out and about recreating in the outdoors. And so I was really concerned as we come into this busy period. I know that I've written over the last couple of years, and you and I have talked on the radio, Troy, about record number of usage of public lands, trails, campgrounds, boat ramps in the state of Idaho over the last 5 years. And folks are worried that these cuts and these closures are going to exacerbate that. It's going to make it harder to get wildfire information and trail closures and directions and some of the basics, right? We know that a majority of fires started in the West are human caused. And a lot of that comes down to escaped campfires or people not being as conscientious as they can be when they're recreating on public lands. And so John Robinson and some of the other conservation folks I talked to worry that it's going to be that much harder to get information to the public about recreating responsibly, about dealing with wildfires, about dealing with food storage when you're around critters like bears and so forth. And so they're really concerned is how I would characterize it at this point, Troy.
Well, and those are the big public safety things, of course, and certainly fire danger, as we've seen the weather forecast, the fire forecast for the summer are well above average across the West as we get into July, August, and September. There's red all over that map, which is another story entirely. But then you have the impact of people looking for services. I want to get a permit for this, that, or the other thing, or I have a question, and they're not going to be able to do that, or the bathroom's going to be cleaned. Those are the non-safety impacts that people are likely to feel immediately.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think a lot of people venturing out into the outdoors are going to experience this, are going to feel the impact of these cuts. And some of the messaging that these agencies sent out was a little ominous. They talk about if the office is closed and you need something, to leave a message and they'll get back to you when office hours resume, or to try and call 911 if it's an emergency. And so I think we're just now beginning to see the impact on this. But yeah, I mean, we're talking about temporary closures in Stanley and Ketchum. We're talking about Forest Service ranger facilities in McCall, Weiser, and New Meadows being closed immediately until further notice without a timetable for reopening. And so I think that it's something that I know we're going to continue to follow, but I think we're just sort of at the leading edge of what these impacts are going to be, Troy.
Max is back on with us now. Max Silverson from the McCall Star News. Quickly, Max, what has been the reaction in McCall to these decisions to reduce hours and close some ranger stations in the Payette National Forest?
Right. Yeah, sorry about that. Nothing's complete about talking from McCall unless we have an internet interruption, just real quickly. My apologies. But the reaction from a lot of people has been confusion. It's really, like you said, Clark covered it quite well. Like, we don't really know what to expect at this point. There are problems with staffing across the forest, and some of that has been about this closure too. Like you said, this means that public input, visitor interactions with the forest will close at these offices, but it doesn't mean that there's nobody in these offices. There are still people working at the New Meadows station, the McCall Ranger District office. So it's a lot of confusion, and it's going to be difficult for people too. Like, say you need a permit to cut wood and you live in New Meadows, you now have to drive to McCall or to Council to get that.
Sarah, we were talking earlier on the program with Kevin Richard about the handful of tort claims that the Boise School District is facing related to the former special education assistant accused of sexually abusing students. But the district is facing other legal action as well from a teacher that's related to conditions at West Junior High. That teacher is now alleging the district has retaliated against her for blowing the whistle on those conditions. What can you tell us about that?
Yes, so Michelle Chung, who teaches family and consumer sciences at West Junior High, has alleged that basically she's been raising concerns for years about a mouse infestation in her classroom, where students, are routinely cooking and handling food in a family and consumer sciences class. So she's reporting that there have been mouse droppings and even carcasses found in the ovens and all over the classroom, including one mouse carcass actually found baked inside an oven. So she filed one lawsuit last year against the district, basically alleging that it failed to take these concerns seriously to protect her and students, and that it, was undercutting her when she tried to communicate about those concerns with parents and students. And then last month, she filed another lawsuit in federal court, arguing or alleging that while she was out on family medical leave for a condition she says she contracted because of the infestation, that the district was violating her rights while she was out on leave.
And these are not tort claims at this point. These are lawsuits. Is there a timeline you're aware of for these to proceed?
Good question. I'm not aware of a specific timeline. I can say that in the most recent lawsuit, the federal lawsuit, there is not a lot there in the docket at the moment. The district has not formally yet responded. There's a bit more in the earlier file, but I'm not sure of a specific timeline at this point.
Okay. Max, let's come back to you. You reported this week folks in Adams County are not happy with their EMS service and have proposed redrawing the boundaries to form a new EMS district. They're splitting off, I believe, the community of New Meadows.
Let's see. Yeah, I really like this story because I think it's happening across the state. There's kind of two issues with emergency medical services in Idaho, and one is governance and the other is financing. I'll start with the first one. So governance is kind of the status quo is that county commissioners are both the commissioners and they oversee ambulance services and EMS within the county. So they're kind of pulling double duty. We saw a similar thing happen in Valley County where our 3 fire districts were contracted to do EMS by the county, and it was just kind of too much to deal with for the commissioners, and it wasn't working well for the fire districts either. So they kind of banded together and got a new district together to provide EMS countywide. And that worked out pretty well. It took a couple years to pass a funding increase, but that's another thing. So the same thing is sort of happening in Adams County, except it's being driven primarily by the fire district, which is contract to do EMS. It's difficult because they're two different things. They had not enjoyed how their commissioners are governing the district. So they want to do this to have their own set of commissioners and be able to decide for themselves kind of how to address new development within the district, which includes basically the northern third of Adams County. And they really want to do that, for the governance reason. But there's kind of this looming issue of financing coming over the next 3 or 4 years. They know they're probably going to need more tax money, but they don't really want to ask their voters to have to approve that at the same time if they don't need it. Everyone feels like they're paying, quite a bit in taxes, and it's a lot to ask people. But when this vote does come up, drawing a new district is one of the only times you can get a big increase in EMS funding in Idaho because of the way funding is organized. So if they create a new district with a slightly different boundary, a 50% vote can get you a large levy increase. Whereas if you keep the same boundary, you keep the same EMS levy rate that you had before and have to pass a separate levy override, which requires a 2/3 majority vote, which is much more difficult to get. So it's kind of up to commissioners in the future how they want to tackle that issue, if they want to deal with it now or come back to voters again later with a new set of commissioners.
Well, and you alluded to what happened in Valley County, and yeah, that is different. But I have to think that the folks in Adams County are using that as a template, perhaps, of what to expect, because Valley County wanted to shift its EMS district, but had a levy override on the ballot simultaneously. The new district passed, the money didn't, and that really hurt the efforts there in Valley County. Do you see Adams County as taking that as a cautionary tale in terms of how they decide to proceed here?
That's a good question. I really think they might. I think if you were to ask the Valley County EMS board if they were to do it all again, would they not just go for that kind of easier route of increasing funding? Like if they say it's truly necessary to provide adequate emergency medical services, then I think, it's something they should really consider. But the Adams County District really does they've said they wanted to ask their voters what they think and kind of put it to them instead of forging ahead without that public input.
Clark, you reported this week on the provision in the budget bill that was both added and then stripped in the final days before it passed the House. It would have forced the sale of millions of acres of federal land in the West. The push to reduce the amount of federal public lands, whether that be giving it back to the states or selling it off, is expected to pick up steam in the current Trump administration. What signs have you seen of that so far?
Yeah, for sure, Troy, and thanks. I'm glad that we get to talk so much about public lands today. I teamed up with State Line and the Utah News Dispatch for this story, but the signs we've seen are the budget reconciliation proposals that you just talked about, that was put in there and then taken out. We've seen a massive public lands lawsuit out of the state of Utah seeking to transfer thousands of acres of BLM land, and primarily in Utah, but also a little bit in Nevada. And then even during the Idaho legislative session, there was some talk of it, and there was this non-binding resolution asking for the federal government to transfer small tract of federal land to the state after farmers said that they weren't getting their water through the other side. So we've seen several examples since the new administration took over in January. And that's kind of the heart of what the story is, Troy, is we've heard these talks for years, right? It's nothing new in the West to hear complaints about management of federal public lands and these ideas of transferring it to the state or selling it off. And the issue that we ran into was that in the past, those ideas became very quickly unpopular because of how much public land we have in Idaho, and because all of the different user groups and people that experience public lands and rally around them to support them. So in the past, it hasn't been very popular. But when I talked with some conservation groups in reporting this article, they worried with the new administration that things might be different because of the boldness of some of the actions of public officials and because of some of the norm breaking and some of the Yeah, just kind of some of the boldness and some of the actions from the Trump administration and from of their supporters. And it's interesting, in Idaho, we actually had Attorney General Raul Labrador sign on to the amicus brief that was filed in Utah, asking for support. And I reached out to Labrador's office, and he sent me a statement saying that he thinks the state would be better stewards than the federal government. He said if Idaho owned this land, we could lease it for timber, grazing, and mining, just like the federal government does, but reinvest that revenue right here in Idaho. But meanwhile, the conservation groups I've talked to are extremely concerned right now. We even saw U.S. Senator John Hickenlooper from Colorado making the rounds this last week, talking about an all-out war for public lands. And so I know we're running out of time today, but you can find that story at the Idaho Capital Sun. And I know that's something that we're going to cover closely, but I also know we're almost out of time on the program today, Troy.
Yeah, and thank you, Clark. I appreciate that. If you hadn't teased it, I was going to. Most of these public lands that we get to enjoy here in Idaho tie back to the work of Frank Church, the former U.S. Senator, who was a Democrat. Central Idaho's wilderness area certainly named in his honor, many others as well. Sarah, I really enjoyed your piece this morning on Monica Church, who's Frank Church's granddaughter of both Frank Church and former Democratic Governor Cecil Andrus. Idaho was somewhat a purple state for a long time until the 90s. And you write about some of the lessons that Monica Church says she's learned from her family. Tell us about those lessons and how she thinks that approach maybe has worked during her first term in the State House.
Yeah, it was funny. We wanted to speak to her to talk about how the Democratic Party has evolved, and actually her take was that the party itself and its message may not have evolved all that much, but what she thinks has changed since the time of her grandfathers is really that politicians on both sides of the aisle are not as willing to vote independent of their party or take a stand and speak very plainly and frankly to voters about why they're making that choice. So she said that's a lesson she's drawn from them, that she is trying to bring forward, both a willingness to kind of think for herself, make votes that she's comfortable with, and work across the aisle when necessary, when helpful. To that end, she mentioned that this summer she will be working with someone from the Idaho Freedom Foundation, a right-leaning think tank, to help put together a curriculum for a Western civilization course that high schoolers may take down the line. So that's just one example of, she expressed a lot of willingness to work across the aisle with folks.
When you were talking with her in the final minute we have left here, did she mention anything that maybe she was expecting to go differently in her first year, and something that she had to shift away from her hopes or her preconceived notions about doing this work in this current era?
Great question. I don't know if there was anything that necessarily didn't go the way she expected. I think she was pretty realistic about this being a slow burn. So, she acknowledged that it's important to form these personal connections with other lawmakers, perhaps with voters as well, and that it's not, you're not going to change somebody's mind overnight. But that by creating that relationship and building that trust, being willing to work together where you do have common ground, you increase your chances in the long run of having success. So I think it may be a bit of a time will tell on how that approach works for her.
You can read Sarah's story at idahostatesman.com. Sarah Cutler, thank you for joining us this afternoon. Clark Corbin with the Idaho Capital Sun, thank you as well. We appreciate your time on our Reporter Roundtable today.
I'm Gemma Gaudette, and this is Idaho Matters.
Planet Money helps you understand the economy. We find the people at the center of the story.
Garbage in New York, that was like a controlled substance.
We show you how money influences everything.
Tell me what you like by telling me how you spend your money.
And we dig until we get answers.
I had a bad feeling you're going to bring that up.
Planet Money finds out. All you have to do is listen. The Planet Money Podcast from NPR.